In this segment, we turn to Peru, where yet another child sexual abuse scandal involving the Catholic Church highlights the gross immunization that this organization enjoys from law enforcement authorities. Year after year, decade after decade, we learn about how sexual abusers in the Catholic Church are protected by upper-level Catholic leadership and how abusers are allowed to remain in service to their churches, where they can continue to prey on children. Why has the Catholic Church not been shut down? And are its leaders still allowed to operate unsupervised in the presence of children? I think so. If this were any other entity, a daycare center, sports team, karate school, or just a school in general, would they be treated with the same laissez-faire approach as the Catholic Church? Why does the Catholic Church get a pass? Infidel, perhaps you can shed some light on specifically what is happening in this Peruvian congregation.
Well, this particular group has been under a very close microscope, supposedly, by the Vatican, attempting to rehabilitate them, but a relatively small order. And from their beginnings, they have had a history of sexual abuse literally from their founder. Now, this archbishop's early resignation doesn't clarify anything or give us any motive. Again, the Catholic Church is prioritizing its image and rather than addressing any allegations of abuse, as I said, that have been going on for over a decade at this particular location. Now, their founder, it goes back to him even to the point of having animals bite people and physically and mentally abusing people as well. They've been linked to a violent gang with a land grabbing scheme. So really, we don't know what the reason for this particular resignation. It was unexpected. It was early. But once again, the Catholic Church remains silent and lets you figure it out for yourself. But, the Bible says a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, and neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. I think that we've had over a decade to judge this group both by its fruits and by its founders, and the right choice is to shut them down. Now, I don't think that's what's going to happen in this case. I think we're going to see this attempt to continue, but that's just my opinion. I just wanted to say this story comes from AP News by Nicole Winfield and Franklin Briseno on April 2nd, 2024. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see where it goes from here. But with the history they have, the answer should be simple.
Yeah, it's gross. It's disgusting. It's probably the worst crime that you can commit. Eli, what does this scandal say about the future of this church?
Well, one of the authors of the report that made the allegations against the Sodalitium, as well as Fernando Fagari, the founder, and Jose Aguirre, the archbishop who stepped down, Pedro Salinas is actually reports having been a victim of Fagari's earlier before. And seems to believe that Aguirre's resignation is unprecedented and that it should indicate the possible upcoming closure of the Sodalitium. And I think that kind of sounds like it would be a nice result. I mean, there's so much abuse going on there. This is an organization with a bad history in a part of that is part of a larger organization with a worse history. And it doesn't seem like anything good is coming out of there. They're not really doing any good, providing any benefit that we can't get otherwise, and they're doing some harm that we're not getting otherwise. So good riddance, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. The Pope has weighed in on this, actually. And Scott, in this article, the Pope was quoted as saying, "Loving the church also means having the courage to make difficult and painful decisions, always keeping in mind the good of the church and not of ourselves." But what decision could he be talking about that's so painful?
Well, first of all, full disclosure here that we should note that he was quoting Pope Benedict and not necessarily the current Pope Francis.
Yep. Yes,
and Pope Benedict, who also retired early under suspicious conditions, and so I mean, and we also need to make sure that we point out too that, we want to withhold judgment to some extent, although it's very difficult in this case. The Catholic Church has a long history of cover-ups, of moving priests around, and specifically what you're asking about. What type of decisions are they asking? They're being asked to put the good of the church above their own good. Okay, and when I hear that, I think we don't want to besmirch the bad name of the church. We don't want to besmirch the reputation of the church. We want, even at our sacrifice of ourselves, we're sorry you were abused, but if it comes out, what's that going to tell about the church? And so we need to be careful that that we're viewing that we're listening to these accusations, and that we're taking consideration into the history. And so I don't know. To me, it just rubs me the wrong way. It doesn't pass the sniff test, right? It's putting the priority of the church above abuse victims. That seems downright despicable to me, and
Right.
that very well could be part of why Pope Benedict left office. And so it's interesting and difficult at the same time.
Well, I think Pope Benedict is a suitable figure for this story, because Pope Benedict was actually accused of moving priests around.
Exactly.
I believe there were 4 different cases of child sexual assault in churches in Europe. I don't remember exactly which country, but in any case, he moved these offenders around instead of facing any kind of backlash. So I just want to kind of pivot to Infidel and talk about some of these processes, if you can even call them that the church undertakes. Now, this organization that we're talking about was paid a visit by a Catholic inspector who was supposed to be the premier Catholic expert in child sexual abuse. First of all, how the hell does any religious organization, need a sexual abuse expert on their faculty? It might be a topic for a different discussion, but I mean, can you elaborate on this visit that this church had? What does it say about the Catholic Church to even have someone with this distinction? And what did this person even do?
Oh, yeah, I have to agree with you that whenever your organization has an expert on child sexual abuse, the only thing I could think of is either some type of therapy group or a prosecutor. Outside of that, I can't imagine why you would need an expert on the topic, and what exactly that means, and knowing that, but at the same time, knowing that they have a fund set aside for the defense of people who are accused of sexual abuse. It's not surprising that they'd want to be able to maximize their dollars in this situation, and have somebody who makes those determinations, whatever that could possibly be, is obviously going to be just like the quote you mentioned from Benedict of Catholic Church first. So with that type of mentality, I have little doubt that any Vatican representation that's an expert on child abuse is an expert on maximizing what's in the self-interest of the church. Now, supposedly they came over in July and they asked some questions and told everybody, yeah, everything's good. We're just asked some questions, essentially sounded like they were just trying to, dot I's and cross T's. But, when a guy like that comes to town, that there's something going on. And of course, the heads roll. I think what they're trying to do is just let this guy take the fall and move on. And I think they're going to continue to attempt to rehabilitate this. They've got 10 years into this. And at some point, you got to realize you can't get rid of every order and every group in the Catholic Church that has somebody who's convicted of sexual assault, or you'll shut the whole damn thing down. Sure. And since they're not going to do that at some point, and this is a small order, I think they're just saying, you know what, let's go ahead and push this through. Let's kick this one guy out and say, okay, we fixed everything. Everything's good. Everything's wonderful now. Mission accomplished, moving right along. And I think that's really what we're more likely to see here. I hope that the gentleman who wrote the article is right and they do get shut down. but I think this is business as usual for the Catholic Church.
Sure.
The crime syndicate's going to keep on going.
Well, and they are taking some actions to at least give the impression that they're in some kind of compliance or doing some kind of internal investigation. But they have taken the offensive, haven't they, Eli? I mean, they have been accused by people. What actions has this organization taken to face their accusers?
Yeah, so not the organization itself, but the authors of the reports. So Pedro Salinas and Paula Ugaz. Actually, it was Jose Eguren who filed a lawsuit against the two of them for defamation. It was for different, for different events or for different writings, for different articles, essentially. So Pedro Salinas had written about Eguren being involved with the land grabbing schemes that Infidel talked about, forcing out peasants, as the article described them, to buy out the land. And then Paula Ugaz has been reporting on this type of shit for years, so she's no stranger to being, to these lawsuits. But she had written, and I apologize because I left out that Pedro Salinas also accused that Jose Eguren had known everything about the abuses committed by Fernando Fagari. So it doesn't seem like they're accusing Eguren himself of the physical and sexual abuses, just that he knew everything about this, and also he's doing this other really shady shit over here. And I don't have it up and don't remember quite what it was for that. Paolo Ugaz had been sued, but he had filed a lawsuit against her as well, both in 2019. He even faced pressure from the Peruvian church to drop the lawsuit. So he did. So that lawsuit nothing came of that. The suit was dropped. And that's kind of just where it landed. But as Infidel said, I am all with, completely with, Pedro and Paula. And I really kind of just hope that this does get this sodalidium, just kind of shut down and stop some of this abuse, hopefully at least.
Scott, when we talk about some of these policies or these processes that the church has taken in response to these accusations, what's your take on how authentic they are? Are these attempts at transparency just a facade, or are they trying to be genuine?
Right. Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Right. It's are they being legit here? And on one hand, I'm happy to see that there seems to be at least some attempts to appear accountable. And I may be overly pessimistic here. I'm trying to be cautiously pessimistic. Like we said before, that they've definitely had they've definitely set themselves up here, right? They have a history of the cover up, of the placing the good of the church above the good of the parishioners and that kind of thing. But I'd like to see what's going to come out like in another 10 years, another 20 years, another 50 years down the line, once that statute of limitations has passed, right? Show me the money. We see some accountability here. I want to see a little bit more transparency. I want to see some more involvement of the police. If there's crimes happening here, if there is abuse happening here, I want to see more actions being taken by the church hierarchy, by the higher ups in the church to bring to judgment, to earthly judgment, the people that are perpetrating these crimes. I mean, there's horrendous crimes being committed against human beings here, and it makes it more horrendous that it's a violation of this holy trust that they're putting forth here. It's unwarranted trust, but it's still there. Like I said, I'm being cautiously pessimistic. If you want to ask me to put my money down, I don't think they're being authentic here. But I have to reserve my judgment. If I want to be a good skeptic, I want to make sure that I'm not jumping to conclusions just because their position is against mine. But it would go a long way for them to involve the authorities, and I'm talking about the police authorities, and that would do a lot to put my mind at ease, I guess.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to the larger picture where the church is just not held to the same standards as everybody else. We've covered this in other segments. We've covered this in recent weeks. They don't disclose or make financial disclosures. Nobody has any idea where their money's going. We know that they are embezzling billions of dollars every year. We have no idea what's happening to accused perpetrators of children. We oftentimes never see them again. And we do know that the church has a fund that protects these people, which is probably more asinine than the fact that they have a expert on child sexual assault. But, where do we see this getting better? What are some of the avenues that can help this along? And Infidel, on that point, I kind of want to turn to this idea of rehabilitation that you were talking about. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What exactly do you mean by rehabilitation for this organization or for the Catholic Church in general?
I think that for the Catholic Church in general, you would need something along the lines of a bottoms-up opening of the books, opening the doors, and showing some level of accountability. As Scott said, first, you'd have to welcome the police in and really attempt to clean house. I have to admit that's not something that I would expect to ever happen. I think that what we're more likely to see are attempts, and some of them maybe honest attempts at rehabilitation, of changing the way things are done. I just think that there's so much that goes into this idea of automatic trust, this idea of this holy trust that one of you mentioned earlier, that it brings such an ease of abuse that I think it invites exactly the wrong people for that type of situation. So I don't think that's something that can be fixed. Maybe it can be mitigated in some ways, but right now I think we see the term rehabilitation pretty much being a term thrown around by the Catholic Church to certain things because they're trying to, it's about image control more than it is anything that you or I would see as rehabilitation.
So time and again, we see accounts of sexual predators in the church, not just the Catholic Church, but largely in the Catholic Church, going into confinement or being imprisoned, etc., but also being rehired. And I've talked about this before, that you can actually track this stuff down. And I believe I have a website here, abuselawsuit.com, can tell you which congregations in the country have been accused and what has happened of the accusers. We see them come back and be reinstated. Eli, I kind of want to just get your opinion. And I think I know the answer to this, but with all this talk about rehabilitation, I mean, is this something that is rehabilitation for the individual, something that's possible? I mean, should we be surprised that they're being reinstated? Or should they be allowed? Can we ever trust them again? I mean, what do you kind of take away from this?
When Scott was sharing his thoughts and as you responded, I sat here thinking you mentioned the double standard, Jimmy, that churches are held to, that others. If you could think of any other organization where you point to the CEO and you're like, that guy's fucking kids, and that sounds really vulgar. Some people are like, why do you have to say it that way? Because there's nothing fucking nice about it. It's vulgar. It's fucking horrible. They're fucking kids. And the police aren't getting involved. You're going to the manager and you're saying these guys are fucking kids and they're not getting involved. Why is that happening? And this idea of rehabilitation, like, oh, well, let's just make them better and put them back. No, what are you talking about? Like, there is no other circumstance in which you would go to a victim and say, we are sorry that this happened. We're going to make sure your abuser is better. And then we're going to put them right back in front of you for, until one of you leaves. Yeah. And then, that's so crazy.
And pretty much a rhetorical question. And I think you gave me the response. But my point is, can anybody watching this show, any of our viewers who are followers of the Catholic faith answer differently than the way that Eli just answered? And I would be appalled if you thought that you could. And so this is something that we need to really hold a microscope to, just like we do when, for example, we had a basketball coach a few years ago that said some disparaging terms towards African Americans, fired. Ellen DeGeneres was apparently not being nice to people. Show canceled. But pastors, priests, assaulting children still get to go on living their life. And so I kind of want to end there, but not without getting final thoughts from each of our panelists. I want to start with Scott and move to Infidel and then Eli. So Scott, closing comments.
What I think has to happen here is kind of contradictory two different things. There has to be a bottom-up movement, right? The rank and file Catholics has to stop accepting this. Okay, that this is not okay. This kind of behavior, this kind of cover up, this kind of we can police ourselves. You know, who's watching the watchmen, right? And so there has to be a grassroots movement, but there also has to be change coming from the top down. We talked about this Pope saying, or Pope Benedict saying, keep in mind the good of the church above ourselves. Okay, that has to change. Okay, so there has to be those two changes: a grassroots bottom-up movement. We're not going to put up with this anymore, and then real legitimate change coming from the top down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Infidel.
I think that the only way that the Catholic Church changes is when the Catholic Church becomes irrelevant. I think that they're so entrenched in literally thousands of years of bad ideas combined into a box and with a lot of money behind it. So it's not going to happen anytime soon, but I just have a hard time seeing them make any meaningful changes. And you're right, though, this isn't something limited to just the Catholic Church. It's in every organization, because once again, that presumption of holy, expectation of you can trust this person. And that's what is really what has to change.
Sure. Eli?
This is, one of those things that I think about when I talk a lot about how I think religion causes harm that without providing any novel benefit. And this isn't, unique harm. This isn't unique to Catholicism or the Catholic Church or religion in general, but it is harm that exists, and there's no benefit coming from the organization that's providing it. So it's one of those things I tend to agree with. Part of what Infidel said is that as long as this organization is there, I don't think this is going to change. This is going to continue happening until enough people, or unless enough people within the organization are tired enough of it that they make the change, just like Scott said, from the bottom up and the top down. But I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. I would ask my viewers, what if it were your child? Would you still give the organization money? Would you still trust them? And why are we just doing that openly and not holding them accountable the way that we hold each other accountable? So this is something that we come across a lot on this show, and you can check out past episodes, even future episodes, by clicking the link below.